For some of you, you may have jumped straight to this chapter to learn about how to do charts and graphs. The first part of this chapter will introduce you to creating charts and some of the details about them, which shouldn't be too challenging. But I will conclude the chapter with some different ways to customize the charts and incorporate the details that we've covered in chapters 3 and 4 into them to make them more flexible. With that broad introduction out of the way, let's go ahead and introduce the chart object. Blank chart objects can be inserted by selecting a blank range of data, going to the Insert tab on your ribbon, and picking any one of the chart types. For this lesson, it doesn't really matter, but I'm going to use a bar chart by clicking the down arrow next to this icon and selecting one of the 2D bars. With this approach, I've just created a blank chart template that's going to be very similar across most of your different chart types. Some charts won't allow you to create a blank chart, but we'll cover that later. When the chart is selected, a number of useful buttons will appear along the edge, a plus, a paintbrush, and a filter. And similarly, the ribbon will update to include 2 new tabs along the top for Design and Format, both under the Chart Tools header. The Design tab contains most of the major change factors for the chart, such as the ability to change a chart from one type to another, such as from a bar chart to a column chart, some quick layout options for customizing your chart to predefined settings, some color palette options, the general chart visual styles, and finally, and most probably importantly, the Select Data command. These commands focus on modifying pieces central to the chart, such as adding, removing, or modifying component labels, legends, or even data points. We'll come back to the Select Data command shortly, but first let's check out our Format tab. The Format tab looks at different types of adjustments to a chart that you overlay on top. You can insert shapes onto the chart, such as adding arrows and text blocks to describe components, while also modifying the size and alignment of different floating components inside the chart. These features are all components that can be added to enhance a chart, but are generally independent of the chart's contents and data itself. Right now, since our chart is still completely empty, let's go back to our Select Data, where much of the magic is going to happen. There's a Select Data option along the ribbon on the Design tab, but I most frequently access Select Data by right-clicking the chart and choosing Select Data as seen here. Doing so brings up the Chart Select Data Source window, which has a couple of different touch points. The first touch point is the chart data range along the top. This range is useful for selecting a large subset of data and asking Excel to guess at how to display that data. This guess will vary based upon the chart type and can be pretty useful for learning about how different charts work. Our dataset should be pretty friendly to a bar chart type, so I'm going to select everything that I might want to chart for my graph from D4, which includes the titles, all the way down to D26. As you can see, this gets input as a formula would with equals sheet name exclamation mark range. This formula has very specific requirements that we'll discuss shortly, but for now, after I release my selection, you can see that my window updates very significantly. Excel assigns the data into different groupings called series. Each series represents a different entry within the legend and is how data gets grouped together. Based upon our inputted data range, Excel has interpreted a whole bunch of series, one for each year. Of course, this isn't how I want to look at it, so I'm going to switch the row and column. Now you can see that there are 3 entries: year, plate appearances, and team wins. Of course, this still isn't entirely accurate, as I wanted the year to be the vertical label, but we can manually customize each series. Setting this grand data range can often be a good way to quickly define a starting point for a chart and get an idea as to its appearance. We don't actually want a year series, so I've removed it. You can remove series by selecting it and pressing the Remove button with a simple left click. You'll notice that the chart updates in real time behind here, as does my chart data range, which now points from E4 to F26. Making changes to a chart and undoing those changes can be a messy process, so I'm going to press OK to commit the changes I've made, and then I'm going to go back into the Select Data. Before I go back to Select Data though, I'm going to select Pudge from my dropdown to mess with my data set a little bit. Now my data ends at row 23, but of course my chart doesn't know that. I could edit my whole chart data range, but let's learn about editing individual series. I can select any currently existing series, such as plate appearances, and press Edit. The series edit option will change slightly depending upon the type of chart that is being used and upon the number of dimensions at play in that chart type. In a bar chart, there's only one dimension at play, while scattered charts can have 2 or 3 dimensions, and other charts will have differing types of dimensional uses as well, but they all follow the same general approach. You specify the series name, in this case it links to cell E4, and then you specify the set of series values with their own reference. I could modify my series values from E5 to E26 by manually typing in a modification, such as replacing the 26 with 23. Alternatively, I could click and drag, but when I do that, I need to be careful to clear the previous selection because otherwise it will try to add the range, which is something that I don't really understand, and it's never worked for me because it doesn't interpret it as an array function. But anyhow, once you're done making your changes here, you can press OK to continue. Finally, some chart types will have selectable axis labels show up as a separate input. Bar charts are like this, and as you can see in this sheet, I've added a different label column in C that instead of going from 1 to 22 goes from 1988 through 2010. My current labels are bland entries of 1 through 21, but I can replace them by editing this horizontal category axis, selecting C5 through C26, and pressing OK. Now you can see that my axis is labeled differently for this purpose. Right now I'm using hard-coded references, but we could just as easily substitute names into our series as well, but we have some other rules to follow in doing so. This spreadsheet has names for both plate appearances and team wins, which are non-dynamic global names. You might think that I could simply replace the whole series values with a formula that says equals Z plate appearances. But if I press OK, I get an error that says there's an error in the formula you have entered. That's not very helpful. This error is entirely useless because in any cell, anywhere within this workbook, that formula would work, but the chart formulas are extra picky. For my named range to be recognized by the chart, I must include the sheet name as a reference. So if I add, open quote, analysis exclamation in front of my named range, suddenly it works. Notice, I have to type the name in to use it, so having a good naming convention comes in useful yet again. After making this entry and confirming my chart, I'll get a strange result if I go back into my series to edit it. Instead of having analysis in front of my name, it's been replaced with 5-1-introducing-charts.xlsx. What does that mean? Well, since my name is a workbook level name, the name has been preceded with a workbook name instead of a sheet name. Now, we also have the local plate appearances and local team wins dynamic named ranges from our lesson there. Each one is a sheet-specific name, unlike our Z names, but we can still enter them in the same way as our workbook named ranges. As worksheet-specific names, they will continue to use the sheet name approach instead of replacing it with the workbook name, so I generally prefer to use local names whenever I make graphs. If the chart detects an error in a dynamic named range, it will not allow you to enter the name at all, so you should verify your names before using them in charts. For example, I have a dynamic named range that has an improperly calibrated offset function that has a height of 0. I've called it local error. If I try entering it into my team wins, I get an error when I press OK. Additionally, there is a known bug that occasionally Excel's charts may not always update correctly with changes to named ranges that presents itself in larger workbooks where the calculation trees become sufficiently complex. The updates will not appear in the charts until after having closed and reopened a whole workbook. However, the bug is not always present, so you should just be careful when relying on charts that use dynamic ranges and check to make sure that they update. With that, I've covered the basics to defining the inputs for charts. The chart can be modified in any number of ways across the Design and Format tabs. The Quick Layout commands on the Design tab allow you to use pre-specified formats. Simply mousing over each format will show you how your chart would reformat itself. Some include additional legends, others have different title options, and some even include the data tables for the bar type itself. Each of these will be built-in layouts that will have been defined for a given chart type and might not suit your needs. If I select this one, I can then individually add or remove elements by clicking on the plus next to the chart and checking the box that I'm interested in. Any of these items can be added with a huge variety of additional options underneath to allow for customization of each individual chart requirement. Similarly, along the Design tab under Add Chart Element, each of these will have a More Options button that you can select that will open up a different style of dialogue, generally along the right-hand side of your screen. Covering all of the possibilities in these More Options sections will be impossible in a reasonable amount of time, but here are some broad strokes. First, this menu here is context sensitive. I opened it by selecting More Options on an axis. I can change the context by either adding a chart element such as a title, or I can select any item within my chart and have the context menu update to indicate what I'm editing. I could use this to select a data series and modify which axis it gets plotted on to completely revise what my dataset looks like. You can also customize the axes themselves, the titles, any number of things. Each of the different object types will have options unique to its purposes, and pretty much any component of the chart can be modified in some way. As these possibilities are nearly endless, I'll leave it up to you to play with these with whichever charts you end up using, and for now I'm going to stick to the quick layout formats for the charts that we designed. This has been a pretty long and very broad lesson, but we've covered the basics of how to give a chart a dataset and how to modify a chart in different ways. Throughout the rest of this chapter, I'm going to focus on specific charts and chart groups and how each of them works.